Today, we're jumping back in time to the 15th and 16th centuries. This was an era where a handful of incredibly risky, audacious sea voyages didn't just fill in some blank spots on the map, they completely redrew the whole thing and changed how humanity saw the planet itself. So, to really get our heads around this time period, let's start with a little thought experiment. What if the main rule for claiming a new country was basically first come, first served? Just calling dibs. It sounds kind of wild, right? But honestly, that's not too far off from the mindset that fueled this whole age of discovery. To make sense of what these explorers did, we really have to try and see the world through their eyes. The moral and political rulebook they were playing from, it was completely different from ours today. And wow, what a contrast it was. I mean, look at this. Today, we talk about international law, human rights, and a nation's right to decide its own fate. But back then, conquest was just standard policy for a state. A king could make a claim, and that single decision could seal the fate of millions of people on the other side of the planet, all in the name of grabbing more wealth and power. So, what was it that actually pushed these nations to sail off the edge of the known map? Well, it wasn't just simple curiosity. It was a seriously high-stakes race, and it was fueled by some really powerful forces. Yeah, it really wasn't just one thing. It was more like a perfect storm. You had European powers who were desperate to find a direct way to get their hands on Asian spices and silks. You had these intense rivalries, especially between Spain and Portugal, pushing each other to get there first. And at the same time, you had all these new advances in shipbuilding and navigation, plus this huge drive for national glory and religious expansion. It was the perfect recipe for a global explosion of exploration. Okay, so let's zoom in on three guys whose journeys had a massive, massive impact on history. They're the ones who really fundamentally changed the map for everyone. So here are our main players. We've got Vasco da Gama and Pedro Cabral, who were both sailing for Portugal. And then there's Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese explorer, but he was sailing for Spain. Each one of them pulled off something absolutely monumental. Da Gama cracked the sea route to India, Cabral claimed Brazil, and Magellan, well, he led the very first mission to go all the way around the world. First up, Vasco da Gama. He did something many people thought was just impossible. He sailed all the way around the southern tip of Africa to reach India. Now, this wasn't just a cool sailing trip, it was a total economic game changer. It gave Portugal a direct pipeline to the spice trade, cutting out all the middlemen and turning the nation into an incredibly wealthy global power almost overnight. Then you've got Pedro Cabral. And here's the funny thing, he was actually trying to get to India, just like da Gama, but he sailed so far west out into the Atlantic that he literally just bumped into the coast of South America. He claimed the land for Portugal, and that complete accident is what gave Portugal its massive foothold in the New World, the country we now know as Brazil. And that brings us to Magellan. His goal was something else entirely, something no one had ever even tried, let alone accomplished, to circumnavigate the globe. Just think about the sheer audacity of that for a second. To sail out into a mostly unknown ocean, believing you could just keep going and eventually end up right back where you started. And what an unbelievable journey it turned out to be. He left Spain with 5 ships. He had to navigate these treacherous, icy straits at the very bottom of South America. And then he crossed the Pacific, this enormous, empty, seemingly endless ocean. Tragically, Magellan himself didn't survive the trip. He was killed in the Philippines. But one of his ships, the Victoria, somehow managed to make it all the way back. And that number right there, it says it all. 1. Just one ship out of the 5 that started the journey actually made it back. Only a small fraction of the original crew survived. It was, without a doubt, a historic achievement, but it came at an absolutely staggering human cost. Okay, so you have Spain and Portugal making all these massive claims on new lands. How did they stop themselves from just constantly being at war with each other over it? Well, their solution was as simple as it was audacious. They just decided to divide the entire world between the two of them. They called it the Line of Demarcation. It was basically an imaginary line that they drew on the map, running from the North Pole to the South Pole, right down the middle of the Atlantic. It was made official in something called the Treaty of Tordesillas, and its goal was simple: to stop Spain and Portugal from fighting by giving them each their own zone to explore. And the rule was incredibly simple. I mean, think of it like 2 siblings drawing a chalk line down the middle of their bedroom. Any new lands found west of that line, they belonged to Spain. Anything to the east, that was Portugal's. And just like that, two European countries carved up the entire globe for themselves. And this is why Cabral's accidental discovery was so important, because that little bit of South America just so happened to stick out to the east of that imaginary line. So, thanks to this treaty, Portugal's claim on Brazil was seen as legitimate. It's the reason why, to this day, Brazil is a Portuguese-speaking nation, surrounded by Spanish-speaking countries. So, what was the ultimate fallout from all of this? These voyages sent shockwaves across the globe. They didn't just add new coastlines to the map, they kicked off a chain of events with monumental and often absolutely devastating consequences for the entire world. And you have to appreciate just how fast all of this happened. Look at this timeline. In the span of about 25 years, the world was literally divided in half on paper. A sea route to Asia was opened, a huge part of South America was claimed, and the first trip around the planet was underway. The pace of change was just breathtaking. And the effects were both profound and permanent. You had the Columbian Exchange, this huge transfer of plants, animals, and diseases between continents. This brought on a catastrophic decline of indigenous populations. And, of course, it paved the way for centuries of European colonization, the building of massive empires, and the horrific rise of forced labor systems, including the transatlantic slave trade. Let's just take a closer look at that Columbian Exchange. It's wild to think about. Things like potatoes, maize, and tomatoes traveled from the Americas and completely changed diets all over the world. I mean, can you imagine Italian food without tomatoes? And in the other direction, things like horses, cattle, wheat, and sugar came to the Americas, totally transforming the landscape and the economies here. So, in the end, these voyages set off a massive chain reaction. Global economies were completely reshaped. New empires were built, often on the backs of forced labor, and cultures and languages were spread, often violently, across the planet. The world that we live in today was truly forged in the wake of these incredible journeys. Which leaves us with one final thought to chew on. That treaty, that whole first-come, first-served mentality, it drew lines on a map 500 years ago. So the question for us today is this: in what ways are we still living inside those borders, the ones we can see on a map and the invisible ones that were created during this frantic, world-changing time?